internet is
You want
very
to
jumpy.
start us off with some of your points, mate?
All right, I'll leave us
it?
off. So, welcome everyone. First and foremost, it wasn't a great race, to be honest. I think we've had a few better ones in the can over the last couple of weeks that we've spoken about, but an interesting race nonetheless. I think there's a few points that this race might have raised or solidified that we've sort of been discussing in terms of McLaren, Ferrari. I think we'll probably start off with, other than the fact that Verstappen won pretty convincingly, the biggest margin of the season. They brought their new upgrades this week at Red Bull, and the car, although in qualifying it probably looked the shakiest it's been all year, in race pace it looked pretty imperious, which is something that which is the area where the Red Bull team seems to be able to stretch their legs. But the first sort of point I wanted to discuss was what is going on with Ferrari. You know, Ferrari, start of last year, looked like the team that could, had developed a car that could really be at least, take it to Red Bull. They won a few races early last year. We saw the team fall off by the end of last year. We said, they don't look match fit. They don't look like, in terms of the way the team is performing, like a team that, is going to challenge for a championship. End of the season comes, off season comes. Car hasn't really made the strides that we probably had expected over the off season. And then in the last coming races, we've seen upgrades from McLaren, we've seen upgrades from Mercedes, we've seen upgrades from Alpine that have done a little bit, upgrades from Williams that have done quite a bit for the car. And yet nothing that Ferrari seemed to do, of all the teams, they probably look like the team that have dropped away the most other than Aston Martin, but they've never had the highs this year that Aston Martin have had. What do you guys think of, where do you see Ferrari at this moment in time? Oh, it's just me and you, Tristan.
He dips out every time I join. But no, look, I think I'm sort of been like following the F1 from, I guess, afar this year. To me, it hasn't been the most exciting form of racing. From what I have been watching, I've been trying to keep tabs on obviously everything on social media and whatnot. But from what I have been watching, it just seems like they're going in the wrong direction with their car, their setup, and obviously, probably more importantly, their strategy. So, it's really disheartening to see Ferrari going through this, tough period. And I guess from a, Ferrari fan like myself, or a long-term Ferrari fan like myself, it's been going on since they won their last world championship back in 2007. And I know they had a couple of years where they got pretty close to taking it to, I think it was McLaren and then after that Red Bull. But ever since, it's just been a fall from grace. I don't really know. I don't have the answers for them. I don't think they do either.
No, I definitely don't think they do. And one of the things that we've been discussing over the last couple of weeks is when you look at the F1 teams and you look at the strengths of driver lineups, they're in a pretty comfortable spot with the lineup that they've got.
Yeah.
But their inability to actually provide a competitive car, consistently, it doesn't look like a bad car, but it never has its moment in the sun. Like you look at Mercedes, there are some tracks that it suits, even with the upgrades that they're bringing. It's never looked amazing, but there are tracks that you think, oh, it was the best of the rest today. McLaren has now made a massive jump where, at Spielberg, it looked decent behind the Mercedes. In Silverstone was best of the rest. This race just passed best of the rest, and three very different tracks. So we know that the upgrade package is, consistently able to perform well at different circuits. Ferrari has never had that moment in the sun. Aston Martin started the season really well. They haven't sort of maintained that performance, but they snagged quite a few points early on from that. Ferrari,
it's bizarre because, like I was saying, it just seems like they're going in the wrong direction with things. We spoke, you said before, sorry, about how, Ferrari last year seemed like they could have potentially been the team to, take it to Red Bull and potentially win that world championship, and it definitely seemed that way at the start of the season. I think last year they probably had the best car on paper. And I think their strategy cost them a lot towards probably the middle part of the season. And then as a result of that, they took gambles that they probably didn't need to take in the race and in their strategies. And that definitely, in my opinion, cost them a chance of, potentially being world champions again. Like you said, we've seen Mercedes take a massive leap the last 2, 3 races. McLaren have taken a massive leap in the last 2, 3 races since their upgrades, and so their progression in their development of the car is obviously working. You mentioned Aston Martin. They come out this year, pretty much 100% committed to their car at the start of the season, throwing everything at it for the first half of the season and probably utilizing all of their resources for their cap the first half, meaning they had nothing left for the rest of the season. So now we're seeing everyone catch up to them.
Sorry about that.
And yeah, it just seems like Ferrari either haven't been able to match those upgrades or just have completely fallen off the wagon in terms of performance.
It's I think this race was such like a little microcosm for their season. There was
Mm,
3 moments I really thought, okay, this is, the way that they're stringing this race together is really a head scratcher. There was one moment when at the start of the race, I always get the 2 names wrong, confused. Carlos was
Carlos and
running,
Charles.
yeah, was running behind Charles, but he was running the softer tire. So I
Yep.
thought, oh, they'll let him through because he's definitely obviously running a different strategy. And they
then
sort
there
of
you go.
left him. They
Mm,
sort of left them, yeah, in the same position. I thought this is an odd decision. And then we saw when Charles came in, we saw the tire fumble, which gave him a very long stop. And then coming out of the pits, we saw then Charles have a speeding penalty in the next pit stop, trying to sort of make time on Carlos. And it's just like 3 totally different mistakes that,
that's
3
what
of them.
they just been very consistent at, is making mistakes. And I don't know if that's down to management or maybe the staffing, mechanics, and obviously engineers going on at Ferrari. But from what I can understand, is they often go very much country orientated for who works for Ferrari. You don't often see a lot of people from, Great Britain or Germany, you know, work for Ferrari. They often pick Italian, countrymen to work there. And I wonder if at this point in time in the sport, there's just not enough, brain power from outside of the world helping, them to steer the ship in the right direction.
I
You
don't
see,
think
like, Mercedes obviously have a lot of German-based people involved in the brand, but they've also got a lot of Great Britain. I think I actually read somewhere that they've got a few US, mechanics and engineers on board now, and they're branching out throughout the world, looking elsewhere for what can potentially get them back on track. And I don't see that going on at Ferrari.
I just when I see Ferrari, I feel like see a team that is run very much of passion and
Yeah,
emotion, and
so
probably
true.
not much, or not as much on I don't know what the word would
Like
be,
ingenuity, maybe.
just systems, like the right
Mm,
systems in place. I mean, it is an interesting point that they are very, a very Italian team, and that's probably where the emotion and
yeah.
passion comes from. I just don't think that that's an excuse for budget that they
Mm,
bring in, like the fact that they can't. This is now the second team principal that hasn't been able to iron out such simple, like they're very simple fixes.
mm,
So it's like McLaren in the last 2 or 3 races has got their shit together very quickly in
yeah,
terms of doing
100%.
great pit stops for their team. And
Well,
especially now, like it doesn't look like it, but the midfield teams, the McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari,
even Aston
Aston
Martin,
Martin,
yeah,
they're so close
so true.
that these mistakes are really what's costing them races,
Yeah,
especially when track position is key.
it's so
On a
true.
track like that, it's
Mm.
such I think they were even showing that the pace that Ferrari had during the race was very comparable with the front runners.
Mm.
They just shot themselves in the foot,
But they
wasting
seem to do
points.
that, too often. And this is what I said before. They're very consistent at fumbling the ball. We look in even our world in Australian motorsport and in V8 supercars where, you got a team like Brad Jones Racing, and by no means are these guys, the best, or should they be front runners, but so often does their strategy and pit stop, success, lead to on track success. We've seen, I think, over the last 5 or 6 years, they've won the pit stop challenge, which obviously brings a little bit of revenue to the team, which they use to put back into the team. But this, it's a perfect example of, a team utilizing everything they have to excel on the racetrack. And like I said, you often see them, come out more times than, not in front, or very rarely making pit stop mistakes. Whereas Ferrari, it seems like just about every single one of their races that, they've either had a DNF in, or maybe they finish outside of the points, outside of the top five. They had very strong chances of getting podiums, and their pit stop team let them down, or they made an error, or they had a long stop, or their strategy was not on par to that of Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, and even Aston Martin in the last few races. So
it's like the different sections of the team have different turns of jeopardizing their race chances. If it's not the if it's not the drivers, it's the pit stops. If it's not the pit stops, it's the strategy. And then there was even a very interesting point that they're making after the race, and it was it's a team where like Carlos calls his own strategy pretty much, and then the team said to him, he said, "I want to do this," and they said, "Good choice." And then at the same time, Charles is always asking questions, and they're always saying, "We'll get back to you in a couple of laps." Like there's such a reaction team. There's no like.
But in F1, you don't have a couple of laps. The second
that's right. You don't
start
have
to
you don't
fumble the
have one
ball
lap.
and you make the wrong strategy call, or that lap that you might have, the tires could completely, soften or fall off a cliff, or you could lose 2 or 3 seconds a lap to your competitors, which you just can't afford that. You're talking about a sport which is measured in milliseconds. These guys are monitoring the pit stops to the absolute centimeter of the racetrack. Where other cars are going to come out, who's who they're racing against. All of these things are factors in pit stops. And for me, it just doesn't seem like Ferrari have a solid understanding of what they need to be doing, or the direction they need to be going in. And that's obviously on track and of course off it.
I think there is some serious soul searching in leadership that team has to establish. But well, I think this season's a write-off, not in terms of where they can finish, but in terms of obviously competing for a championship. But it is a time now, I think, where it's going to be imperative that they get their ducks in a row, so that they have a good platform going forward. Next point, I think this was impressive for me, because me and Harry, after the last race, had said it'll be interesting how McLaren can perform at Hungary, because the track is so different to Silverstone. So many different characteristics, a much more, I'd say, aero-dominant track in terms of not much straights, a lot of longer corners, and a lot of flick corners.
And completely different layout too, elevation and modulation. That changes everything in setup.
Temperature of the actual race day.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were able to, although Piastri sort of faded a little bit at the end, which is somewhat it's understandable from sort of even how he sort of laid out what happened in his race. The fact that they came second, Perez wasn't able to catch up to Norris, even though he started in the top 10. That car has serious pace.
It does.
It's not a Red Bull.
Yeah, their qualifying pace was exceptional. They're doing a really great job of putting the car where it needs to be. They understand they probably don't have race-winning pace, but they've worked very hard over the last probably 7 months to get to a point where they're capable of contesting podiums. And obviously front row lockouts. That they've got a car that's potentially capable of securing a few pole positions, or second, third, fourth on the grid, to give them a solid chance, a two-car chance of winning or potentially placing.
A two-car chance of scoring decent points is massive for the position that team is in.
Have you ever seen such a big turnaround in a championship where, the mid-season changes have worked so massively compared to this season.
I've never seen a upgrade package
Mm,
change a car so drastically. Because I
yeah,
was thinking about this. Mercedes is a better car than it was at the start of the year,
so true. Oh,
and
it's
it's
night and day
still
better.
it's night and day better. But the fact that we're not talking about that
Mm,
because McLaren has been able to make such a bigger jump,
mm,
um, like I feel like we're sort of getting lost on the fact of how big of a jump it is. Like they were a team that had 30 points through
mm.
10 races,
Well, they
and
were
now they're sort of
finishing
back
15th
of the
and
10.
16th,
They get
when,
maybe they might struggle a couple points in the back of the
yeah.
10. They had a few tracks that suited them and they got some somewhat decent points.
Mm,
But to go from 30 points between two, I don't even know if Piastri, he had points in Australia, 30 points between two cars in 10 races
hmm
to adding 50 something, 50
in
points
two. Mm,
in two is massive. And then you look at the way that the chips are falling with Aston
mm.
Martin, they can score 3 points a race now, and McLaren's going to chase them down to the end of the year because that car hasn't evolved. But to springboard Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Mercedes
Mm.
in one upgrade package, and also then be the car that looks like if anyone's going to snag a race from Red Bull if they fumble, maybe it's a rain race. It looks like it's going to be them. Is huge. It's
So then,
huge
if this is the case, there's still rumors that I think Lando Norris's contract is up at the end of the year.
next year.
I highly doubt Carlos Sainz is staying at Ferrari. You got probably a quite a wild, silly season. If you're a Lando Norris right now, or even I guess an Oscar Piastri, I guarantee you that kid's getting offers left, right, and center. But if you're an Oscar Piastri or a Lando Norris right now, with the current progression of McLaren, would you stay at McLaren or would you be looking elsewhere?
I can't see why they would be looking elsewhere in where how good this car is looking
Mm,
now. It's just um why would you want to move? That's the thing. Like I think Ferrari's drivers are going to hold station. They're not going to get paid that well anywhere else. Mercedes will only change if like I think the game that everyone's playing is they need to all keep the strongest two drivers they can keep. So
mm,
McLaren is in a great position now. Ferrari, if they can get the car right, is in a great position. Mercedes is in a great position. Red Bull is in a shaky position, I feel, and Aston Martin is in a shaky position from their own making. Like there's fixes Red Bull can make, but I don't know if Aston Martin's going to do the same thing. So in terms of McLaren going forward, I think they found a team leader under Andreas Stella, who has been able to pull the minimal resources he's had at his disposal to develop on that car something that works. And they have got new teams, people coming in. They've invested heavily for next year. They've got I can't remember who it is coming in from. Is it James Key from who used to be at Toro Rosso coming in
yeah, he was at
next year?
Toro Rosso.
Yeah, so they've got big thing. Oh, important pieces coming in. They've got this wind tunnel that Anth's been talking about for a year coming online
Mm,
next year. They've got stuff happening next year that is only going to further propel them forward. And you can't forget that the power that the name McLaren has in the sport over really even over Mercedes. Like I feel like when you look at Formula One, Ferrari is the top dog, but in terms of name. But other than
mm.
that, if McLaren was able to be the second best or the team pushing Red Bull, that's a massive draw for them. Like the history that McLaren has, Senna, Hakkinen, the
James Hunt,
James
Nicky
Hunt,
Lauda.
Prost,
Yep,
Lauda, um,
Rost.
so many champions have come through there.
Mm,
Hamilton,
yeah.
uh, it's
Um,
such a draw. So I don't think they'd be looking at moving. I'm just like I feel like what we've seen in the last three races is this car is not going anywhere. It's not disappearing in races. It
it's
can do
it's only
everything.
probably going to get stronger, and this is probably where I thought maybe Aston Martin were heading. But there is obviously rumors that they won't be in the sport from 2026. I don't know actually what's going to happen. Maybe they're giving up their license, or maybe they're
That would
moving that
be
on to another brand. But
that would be interesting because they're spending a lot of money on their
they,
new headquarters.
it does seem like they're
Well,
used it to get in, sell cars and get out. But
but
you got to think that in 2026, this all changes again. You know, we've
where
got a
did you
new
read this?
fuel.
'Cause I thought Aston
Look,
Martin was
I
teaming up with
read it.
Honda in
I read it
26.
somewhere. I can't say it was a reliable source. But I did read it, and that like raised my eyebrow because I thought, you know, they were heading in a good direction. I also read the same thing about Alfa Romeo. So, you know, take out of both of those what you will. But again, I'm not
Uh,
too sure how reliable this source was. It's just something that I heard.
well,
It
Aston, I
would
would
be
say
interesting.
Aston, I don't think is well from the amount of money that they're spending at the moment.
Mm.
I can't see them leaving, and I feel like even the amount of points they've scored this year, it's far exceeds anything they've ever got before.
So this is the
Um,
interesting thing about F1, right? How
yeah,
many more Aston Martins, and I know you don't see sports cars very common, but how many more Aston Martins do you see, let's say, flopping up on Instagram, even on the streets? I see quite a lot,
uh, yeah,
you know, and maybe that's my targeted audience on Instagram and that, but I see like a lot of people, you know, slamming Aston Martin DB9s or you know, just driving these cool cars. And to be completely honest, the cars themselves, even from a road point of view, look so much better than they did, let's say, 5 years ago. And I'd say the technology that they're gathering and the resources that they're gathering from Formula One, they're putting into their, you know, development department in their road cars, which we've seen Ferrari, McLaren, you know, Mercedes do in the past. And I think this whole launch for them to go to F1's been a major success. I think they've accomplished what they probably needed to, which is getting people to buy Aston Martins again. You know, unless they're looking at winning world championships in the future, which, you know, potentially could happen under the new rules. But I don't really see much point for them to keep throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at something that they probably won't win at. Not unless they do come up with that groundbreaking development like Red Bull seem to have found. Um,
I think I think Aston Martin as a team, and I've talked a lot of shit about them. Not shit
mm,
about them. I've been very critical of them as a team. But what they're doing, I feel like, is all putting in building blocks in places that
mm,
are going to become very important in the future. They've built
yeah,
themselves a new state of the art factory, which has been a massive upgrade, sort of from the facilities that Force India had been using before that.
true.
Uh, when the new engine regulations come in, they've now signed a contract with Honda to be the only Honda team. So they're getting their own power unit, which is what most works teams or
Mm.
they want to do because they think that's what gives them a competitive advantage. And it can if Honda get their, hit the ground running, which we
Well,
saw their engine. Yeah,
they've won the last two. Red Bull still with Honda?
they are at the moment, but by the time the new rules roll around, they'll be with Ford. So
Yeah,
Ford will be with Red Bull.
there you go. Well,
Alfa Romeo is leaving. They're going to become Audi. So we all know that.
yeah,
But when I see Aston Martin, the only thing that I question about what they're doing is, and maybe it's just because I know at the moment it is what it is. They need a second driver in that car who is on the level, or they need two drivers in that car that are on the level of the other big teams.
mm,
And Lance Stroll, no matter how good or how much better, how much credit I give him that people don't give him,
yeah, I
he's still
agree. I
not.
do give him a lot of credit, but he's still no Fernando Alonso or Sebastian Vettel.
He's not in. He's not. He doesn't. He's not in the league of the drivers that are
No.
in those other teams. So if they want to make the next steps, I feel like that is the sort of next step they need to take is
Yeah,
to get that.
that's a good point, you know, and I think we've seen, like we said, McLaren take that step. We've seen Mercedes take that step again. Um, you know, this is probably the same spot that we saw Mercedes in, you know, early 2010s, 2011, 2012, contesting for a couple of podiums here and there, but relatively a third or fourth string team. And we've seen them take those inroads in their development to, figure out that next potentially
And
7-time eight. Well, they won eight, didn't they? 8-time world champions. So,
that's right. And the thing
I
is
think,
that,
yeah, that definitely teams like McLaren and Aston Martin and obviously Mercedes are taking the right step, which goes back to the point of Ferrari. They've just done the complete opposite.
well, you look at the big decision that Mercedes made, which was getting rid of comfortable Bottas and bringing in George,
True.
which was and Bottas was much closer to Hamilton's level than Stroll is to Alonso's level. But they realized the importance of having the strongest lineup they could have for any other reason than not giving someone else George Russell, who was who's great. So I think Aston Martin, that is the big boy step that they need to take.
Who would you put in that car? Let's say
I'd
you
like
replace
to,
Stroll.
I'd like to see them put a young guy in who's from F2
Do you
and let
think like
him learn.
Fittipaldi or something? Or
I'm interested in Fittipaldi because he's been in the sport for so long now doing testing. I don't think it even like the teams he's been involved with see enough in
is
him.
is he Aston's reserve driver?
No, he's Haas's reserve driver,
Who's Aston's? That's
Dragovic.
Dragovic. I've heard good
I
things about
wouldn't I
him.
wouldn't mind seeing Dragovic have a go,
Yeah.
but at the same time, when I'm looking at Aston Martin, they don't just need a good driver.
Mm,
They need a generational talent.
that's
And when
so true.
you look at the sort of Formula 2 ranks as we speak, there's 4 drivers in there that are sponsored by Red Bull. There's about, I think,
Mm,
there's 3 drivers that are sponsored by Alpine. These big teams are putting the money in finding the next thing. But
next
Aston's
Oscar
not doing.
Piastri.
Yeah, like you look at the way that say what you want about Alpine, how they nurtured Piastri through the system.
Mm,
Um, and even you look at Alpine now with, I can't remember the other 2 drivers, but like Jack Doohan's involved
Jack Doohan.
and the 2 other fellows who are involved in that sort of that tussle, that they're investing in finding a great talent. I just don't see Aston doing that.
I
If
feel
they're
like
not going,
I feel like while we're on the Jack Doohan front, we should at least acknowledge the fact that he had a unbelievable win in F2.
he started the season was quite poor.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think there was a few things that weren't in his control.
Yep.
But ever since we've sort of hit the European leg tracks that he's more comfortable with or he
Mm.
knows, he's looked a lot better, a lot more consistent. He had
Well,
I think it was
he had a
the
couple of mechanical failures, didn't he, earlier in the
he
season, and
he had, I
that's
think,
led him to be so far down the order. But really, he's been one of the best on the grid. It's just unfortunate with some mechanical issues.
I just want to see him push, like, now that
Mm.
he had a sprint race win last race.
Hmm.
He had the feature win this week.
Yeah.
I just want to see him push
Mm.
on. I don't want to see him a mediocre week. I want to see him sort of
Yeah,
take that next
I
step.
agree. I rate Jack. I think he's very talented, and I think he's probably. I mean, there's a lot of talent on that F2 grid, but I think he's probably the most talented on that grid. He's certainly the standout for me this season. Like I said, he had a few mechanical issues, but I
I
think it
haven't.
is in general, a pretty watered down field compared to what maybe we've seen in the last probably decade of F2. And I think
I don't.
it's
I
probably
don't know if it's watered
highlighting,
down or if it's
mm,
competitive, because it is
yeah,
very competitive this year.
it is
And I don't.
competitive.
It
But
could be
like I'm
competitive because
more
it's
so
watered
talking about
down.
like maybe the big names that have come through the sport, in F3 and F2 in the past. And it seems like a lot of them have either, moved on to, well, there's, only 20 seats in F1, but a lot of them have, the good ones have moved on to F1. The, mediocre slash, half talented ones have moved on to maybe IndyCar or GT, and we're left with,
Formula E.
yeah, Formula E. We're left with probably about, 3 or 4 front runners that have a potential of maybe making F1. Whereas I think in the past, pretty much anyone in that top 10 could have a really, really solid argument for making a seat in F1. Um, but I certainly think that Jack, for me, has been the standout in that field. I just hope he, like you said, has a just one solid weekend where he, wins every practice session, wins the qualifying, wins the race easy, and shows to the F1 world that he deserves an F1 seat. Because I think he's not far from, being well worthy of an F1 seat.
I think one thing that I think we can be all critical, not critical of, but we can forget is it is not normal. It is not the norm for a F2 champion who moves to Formula One to move through as quickly as the likes of Russell, Leclerc,
Mm,
and then Piastri did. That's not the norm. That's the
so true.
outlier. And I think because they did that all relatively quickly, uh, we want our drivers to be finished products within 1 or 2 years of F2 or if in of
Yeah, and
F2.
it's an unrealistic expectation, like
100%.
I link this to, let's say, Declan Fraser in supercars. A lot of people are saying he's underperforming, but he's by far in the fourth best car in that Tickford lineup. That's rags and bolts compared to what maybe Cam Waters or James Courtney's driving. Um, and for me, all I think he has to do is keep that car off the wall, consistently improve and, you know, maybe move up a few spaces, a few spots on the grid and just continually, gradually improve. I don't think anyone's expecting him to go out this year and be supercars champion and win races and contest podiums because that would just be completely unrealistic. So I say the same thing for guys like Oscar Piastri and, George Russell when he was in that Williams and, some of these other rookies like Joe Guan Yu. Everyone would sit there and go, oh, this guy should be scoring by now. But it's such a tough game to be at the
Play.
front in because it's such a competitive sport. It's probably the most competitive sport in the world. And that's from everything from driving to mechanic, and obviously engineering perspectives. It's got to be one of the most competitive environments in the world. And it takes a long time for you to figure out what you need to do.
Well, I think Jack has, from watching the last couple of races, he's definitely found some form. He's not putting himself. He's finishing. He's not pushing himself to making mistakes. He's finishing where the car can finish. And
Yep.
the last 2 rounds, I think, has been particularly good. I wouldn't say he's the cream of the crop of the grid this year because I haven't seen enough,
Yeah.
regardless of if there was mistakes or just where the car was in general. But the competition is so close and there's so many races still to go that it can go anyway. Like I feel like
True.
there's two Red Bull drivers who look quite good. The Japanese one, I can't remember what it is.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't want to. I don't want to ruin his name. It sounds like ayahuasca. I
Mm,
really like him. There's a gentleman, Ollie Berman, I think is really
yeah.
good, as well. And Fittipaldi,
Bit
the
of quality.
F2 Fittipaldi is also really good.
Mm.
But I don't think it's like a clear cut. I just think he might be too many points down
To
to
make
make it like
an
even if he
impact on
makes
the
a charge,
championship. Mm.
he's going to need a bit of help. But there's races to go. So I just hope that if he can at least string together a decent second half of the year, because I think he's going to do one more year in F2, I would guess.
You don't
I
think
wouldn't.
maybe they're not Renault anymore. Alpine have a place for him?
I would speculate that they probably do. I would I would say the same thing that I said about Piastri last year. If he was to stay with Alpine,
Hmm.
I think he would be doing reserve driver roles and maybe having a seat in the endurance team next year, waiting for one of the contracts to expire. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad spot for me either, to be honest. I don't know. I think Alpine will not drop a driver this year if the problems that they keep having in terms of the car, the problems that they're having with the car is making it hard to actually judge the drivers, I believe. And I don't
That's a
think
good
they're going to
point.
pull the plug on someone if they know that they haven't given them the tools
Yeah,
and
that's a
they've
good point.
squandered it. What do
I
you think
think
of Danny Rick's weekend?
I well I unfortunately fell asleep about lap 20 of the Grand Prix, but Dude, it's so awesome to have three Aussies on the grid, and you're gonna ask who the third one is, and everyone knows it's Valtteri Bottas.
Oh,
No, I'm just having a joke. But no,
I was like,
it's great to see him back on the grid. I thought he was, very competitive considering he's been sitting on the couch for the last 12 months.
yeah,
And even before that, he was in a package that just could not deliver. So for him to jump you know, into a car like that and beat his teammate, I think in every session but one, was very impressive. We all know what he can do. We all know what he was and is capable of. We all know that on any given weekend in the right car, he could be the guy. So um, yeah, it was really cool to see him back. I know I've already copped a lot of slack for this, but I think his helmet this weekend was terrible. I know he always does wacky helmets, and I know we don't agree on that.
no,
But you know,
I didn't hate his helmet, but I didn't like it,
yeah,
but
true.
I didn't hate it. But you know what it
Oh, that
reminded
was
me
the
of?
other boys, wasn't it, in the group chat?
Yeah,
They were all raving on how good it was. I'm thinking it looked like
nah,
something out of Talladega Nights.
it reminded me of a well, you know the like the caramel sucky lollies.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that was that. It looked like that one of those Jolo lollies with some
yeah.
stickers
That's
on
a
it. It's
good
like
one.
that, just
That's not bad. I see that.
a weird color. I was like, that's
Yeah.
a
But
didn't
anyway,
pop.
look, it was awesome to see him, get back in the car. And look, if everything keeps going the way it's going with Sergio Perez, I think it's already, the ink's already dried out on that one. Where Danny Rick's gonna end up next year. But on that Danny Rick thing, it is for me. It's awesome to see him back, but it's also disheartening for Nick DeVries. I always thought he was worthy of an F1 seat. And we were speaking before, how long it takes for you to, get your toes in the water and to start feeling for it. If we only gave I'm very familiar with supercars. So let's just hypothetically say Triple Eight and Red Bull Racing in Australia only gave, Brock Feeney to halfway through last year before they moved him on. We wouldn't
I'll give
see the Brock Feeney that we have now. We wouldn't
I'll
see
give
the
you.
guy that's capable of winning every race, you
I
know.
think I'll give you a better example because Brock, I think, didn't never looked out of. He never
No,
looked
but
like
when I
he
say
never
Brock
looked
Feeney, I mean his
uncomfortable.
teammate was winning every race and he was finishing ninth or 10th,
Yeah, but like,
so he wasn't reaching his true potential in the first 10 races.
do you remember when Cam Waters started at Tickford in the main game,
So
and
true. Cam Waters.
he looked a lot more raw,
Yeah.
and even like Randall, like
Mhm.
they both took a little bit more time to come into their
Adjust
own,
to it. Mm.
to adjust to it. I think Brock Feeney, because he had that Bathurst supercar, the
Yeah,
Bathurst wild
with
card.
with super cheap.
Yeah, we saw that he had something straight away, and then we
Mm.
knew that he was going to take some time to get there. Whereas when Waters came in, it was sort of like he's been really good in Super Two, but then
That's
it
very
did
true.
take him probably 2 years to really become the
Mm.
guy that we know now.
That's so
And
true. And that,
if you had thought, oh, 1 year
yeah.
and then groomed him aside, we would have never seen it.
But
I think
even
that would
like
be
to give the driver a year, at the end of the rate, at the end of the season, you should be adjusted pretty well to your car. You should be pretty comfortable in driving it and navigating that to, further up the grid than where you started your season. But for Nick DeVries, he only got 10 races. I think he got 10, but and for me, that's just not enough time to get used to, especially an environment like that. You got a guy that raced in F2 for so many years and, always ran at the front. I thought he was worthy about 4 years ago for a seat. I think that's when the whole squabble of, Mick Schumacher and that was going on. And unfortunately, he missed out on a seat, even though at the time I thought he was worthy. I thought he maintained his competitiveness. And, we could be talking about a kid that if he was given the right opportunity 4 5 years
three
ago, he
years ago.
could,
Yeah,
yeah, he could be potentially in a race winning car and competing for race wins or even
it was.
championships.
I
So
feel
I
like
think I feel sorry for him the way he's been treated. It's unreal for us Aussies to see, the honey badge back in the sport and smiling again. But, I just think he's been the sacrificial lamb, unfortunately.
I think it's interesting. Like I thought first and foremost, Ricciardo, awesome weekend. Great qualifying, looked comfortable. He looks happy, which is very important for him. He looks fresh and ready to be there. Had an unfortunate first corner incident that sort of somewhat ruined his race, but then what he was able to do was get past it, race forward, which is something that we haven't seen him do for so long.
So true.
Actually have a great strategy, get up to 13th in the race, which doesn't seem like much, but coming from the back, and being able to race up to 13th in the race, great result for him. Also dropping De Vries as hard as it was, and I said it was harsh from that perspective, right decision.
Yeah, of course.
Because they got the best qualifying performance that they had, I think, all year. They didn't get points, but Danny Rick just looks
more
comfortable,
and which was always to be expected.
Yeah, that's the sad thing, I think, for De Vries. But
it could also be bad for Yuki as well, because we were talking about this Yuki potentially being maybe the next guy to jump in Perez's spot. And, I mean, it's only one weekend, but on the weekend, Danny Rick made Yuki look like a second grade rookie. So
I think the crazy thing is that in the Red Bull stable, Verstappen is untouchable, but that's fine. He has no reason to be touched. But you look at Perez can come third, second, doesn't matter. He's expected to come second. So we're only going to notice the things he does wrong.
Correct. So true. Unfortunately for him, he's been doing a lot lately.
He hasn't helped himself.
No.
He has put this problem on himself. Danny Rick is not expected to do anything except beat Tsunoda. So if he beats Tsunoda, snags points,
he gets that Red Bull seat.
But everything he does is looked at favorably. He's from the system. The team already loves him. So everything he does is just a tick. He can only get ticks.
And from a PR point of view, he's probably the most famous guy in F1 right now. He's not even he's not even winning races. So from a PR perspective, it's I mean, it makes so much sense. And then my next question to that would be Liam Lawson to, replace Ricciardo next year.
I think it's going to be interesting how the contracts shake up because of how the salary cap or the salary thing works now. And if they're going to drop Perez, I don't know if it's worth it for them to just move him to AlphaTauri to not have to waste that money, I suppose. So the way that the contracts is going to work is going to be interesting. My belief is if Danny Rick keeps doing what he's doing, he'll be a Red Bull driver next year. It'll up to be either Perez's decision to go down to AlphaTauri, or leave the team altogether.
I think
I don't see teams like down.
Red Bull will have a performance clause, and so will the drivers. The drivers will have a performance clause in their contract that if their car doesn't meet their potential, they can leave. And then teams like Red Bull will have that same thing in place. The only difference between a Sergio Perez and Daniel Ricciardo, and I know Daniel Ricciardo comes with money, with Optus and whatnot supporting him, but you've got Sergio Perez who has Telco or Telmax, which is one of the world's largest brands and telecommunications company, and he also has the Mexican government in support. So he's not short of money. He can buy himself a seat whenever he wants, which he's done in the past. He did that with Sauber, did that with Force India, then became Racing Point. He has done that in the past, bought his way into F1. So be it, because in my opinion, he's belonged on that grid. Red Bull don't need his money though, but I would say that comes with as a package to signing Red Bull. I don't see how Sergio Perez keeps his seat under any circumstances. And I'm the biggest Checo fan. I've been supporting him since what he almost did to Alonso in 2012 at Malaysia. I've been a diehard Perez fan ever since. I had wallpapers of him and whatnot. So, for me to see him struggling the way he is really disheartening because I know his true potential. But I also think maybe he's moved on from his true potential. And he's just living in that shadow right now. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's something that you can fix in the next 5 races. It's a mental thing.
I thought his race this week yesterday was pretty good.
His race is good.
The thing I say with him is that it doesn't matter if his race is good. Like we are only going to notice the bad things.
It's so true. And unfortunately, the bad things are you putting a car in a wall at qualifying and, crashing, spinning.
But if he still finishes second and third, I don't know if they're going to swallow his contract wholeheartedly. If they're happy to swallow his contract, because he's contracted for next year. If they're happy to just swallow it and waste that money, I can see him leaving. But the thing is, well, AlphaTauri next year is going to be pretty much this year's Red Bull car, because they're bringing the team pretty much to England, and they're going to use most of the parts anyway.
Which is what they should have done
5 years ago,
10 years ago. But yeah.
So if that's the case, he will still be in a very competitive car come next year if they decide to drop him. I think
it'll be interesting because I think
Yuki's
in the hot deserving of a seat
in Red Bull.
Well, no, I think before the whole Daniel
this year,
what's that? Sorry?
If Yuki can't outrace Danny Rick for the rest of the season, he will be gone.
I think even if he beats, I think even if he does beat Danny Rick, I still think Danny Rick's their guy. In a competitive package, Danny Rick is the guy. I think anybody who disagrees with that would probably need a slap in the face, because I think, like I said, in a competitive car, we saw what he could do against, Vettel. We saw what he could do against Max Verstappen. We saw what he could do against, again, Vettel in a Ferrari. The guy is super talented in the right package. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to see that side of him for the last 4 years since he left Red Bull. But, he's obviously got that hunger. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given him a seat at AlphaTauri. So
what I see happening is Danny is coming to do one job. He's literally the broom that is going to clean out the Red Bull stable.
So true.
He's the measuring stick for Yuki this year.
Yep.
Which Yuki can't beat. He's not going to beat Danny Rick.
I don't think so.
That will be the reason that they get rid of Yuki.
Yep.
It will also be the reason that they either move or remove Perez.
Yep.
Depending on what, I think it depends on where how offended he's going to be about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I never probably considered that, but it is a good point.
They'll bring in Lawson or the other Japanese fella into AlphaTauri. Zero pressure on them. Danny Rick will hold that seat for a couple of years. He'll be out in a couple of years, regardless. And their Red Bull, what's the word?
Junior drivers that can support Max.
Academy is back on track.
Yeah. That's a great point. The Red Bull Academy, and that's what guys like Daniel Ricciardo grow up on. And they come through this academy and they earn their way into an F1 seat. That's what they need to bring back. Like what happened to Max Verstappen was rare. You got moved on because Daniel Kvyat was a liability on a racetrack. But
he was the right choice.
He was obviously the right choice now that we look back on it. But at the time, he was so immature.
100%.
He was so 100%. Immature and his time did come obviously at the right time. He won a Grand Prix in his debut year. I think he was. I can't remember. Won that Spanish Grand Prix.
Race.
Yeah.
It was one of his first couple of races.
Like his 7th race or something when they moved Kvyat down. Yeah. But that was all prime timing for him. Guys like Liam Lawson and I guess even if they decide to keep Yuki, whatever, but they're gonna have to really prove themselves to get into that Red Bull seat, and that's how it should be from now on.
But also they're going to get the thing that I think is more important is Danny Rick's going to be that great reset where he's going to play second fiddle to Max. He's going to push him, but I don't think anyone's going to expect him to beat Max. But what he's going to do is he's going to give their next generation of young drivers the time that they need to, or time that we all need to see if they can, sink or swim.
That's a really good point, man. I actually, I probably never really considered the fact that he'd be their broom. But now that you do mention it, it does make a lot of sense.
But it seems to make sense.
That's all F1 is, I think.
Yeah. Quickly. Yeah. Alfa Romeo. Now, this is a point me and Harry had spoke about last week. about not just Alfa Romeo in particular, but the battle at the back of the grid. So Alfa Romeo, Williams, Haas, and Alfa Tauri.
Mm.
All the cars in that bottom of the grid. It's a close battle, but all the cars have specific strengths and weaknesses. And we said it's going to be dependent on the teams that when they have a strength, when the track is to their strength, to maximize points. And regardless of the fact that all the top 10 cars of the race finished, when you look at Alfa Romeo, and you look at Alfa Romeo's starting position, qualifying 5th and 8th to leave with no points, Zhou ruins the hard work of qualifying at the first corner. Bottas had a problem in the race wall. I can't remember what it was. And you look at the fact that we're going to a track that is very suited to the Williams. They might not have a track that is suited to them for a little while, and points have gone begging. These are, and even like Haas as well. Haas had a car qualify in the top 10 as well. So these are the moments where you think, all right, we need to, as a smaller team, we need to maximize these races.
100%.
The fact that the Williams car finished ahead of them, regardless of if they scored points or not, shows me tells me so much about sort of the headspace of those teams. It's like, guys, your car is better at this track. We know it's better at the track. You can't afford, long pit stops.
Well, this is the thing that I was talking about, that teams like Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, they don't seem to have these pit stop errors. And I know they have in the past, but they don't seem to have these consistent mistakes that teams like Ferrari, Haas, Alfa Romeo seem to have. And I mentioned obviously the BGR, they're not a top running team, but they seem to figure it out, ways to maximize on their strategies. Seems like to me Alfa Romeo are a very similar basket case to that of Ferrari, and they are run by pretty much the same people. They don't maximize their opportunities, and that's a big thing in motorsport that probably not a lot of people understand. I think it's quite simple. You put your foot on the gas and you turn a steering wheel. But their opportunities are, like you say, beating Haas on track or out qualifying and getting a better starting grid with that maximum chance of getting points. We're talking about the difference from, 9th to 10th in the team's championship is $55 million or something in prize pool. So that money revenue goes into that team. It's massive for them, and they can grow and expand considerably with that prize money.
And I think what Williams has shown us in the last over the last half year is that it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to fix the leaks, the controllable leaks in your boat. So Williams have instigated a team principal who's come from Mercedes.
Yep.
So you'd expect very efficient. Their pit stops have always been relatively good. Their strategy calls have become better. And one upgrade strategy, sort of like what McLaren has done to a lesser degree, has accentuated the strength of that car. So the argument I feel with Alfa Romeo, with Haas, and with Alfa Tauri doesn't really hold water, because we can see a team that was worse than them half a year ago has also done a McLaren in terms of jump the pecking order, I think, by a higher factor than one team.
I think the idea of Alfa Romeo was to support Ferrari.
Alfa Romeo is supposed to be the Alfa Tauri of Ferrari.
Yeah, so true. And for me, that was obviously the point of Alfa Romeo, to support Ferrari, because Ferrari have never really had a second fiddle team that can play, to Ferrari's strengths. Whereas you see like Red Bull, they've always had Alfa Tauri or Toro Rosso in the past. We had Mercedes with Williams back in their dominant years. Williams were obviously developing engines and developing the car for Mercedes.
And then Aston Martin, was it Racing Point and Force India sort of became
Yeah,
Mercedes pseudo
so true.
teams
And
as
they
well.
did too. They had the two teams. Williams, I remember when Bottas was in a Williams, he won in Bahrain. He was very competitive in that Williams. And we're not talking that long ago. That Williams potentially could have been the next big thing in the motorsport if the the apple landed in the right spot. But
If they'd
for
invested properly.
me, this battle at the back right now, it seems like, well, I mean, it seems like Williams have got it figured out. I think the direction they were heading in with you know, what's her name? Claire
Claire,
Williams, was obviously the wrong direction. And they went in they were already in a spiral, but they went into a deep spiral when Frank passed away and they lost all control of the actual direction of their team. And they were bought out by, I think, an American company, Delta, maybe.
Dalton Capital.
That's the one. And it seems like their direction is they want to get back to that mid pack and start working on developing their car to potentially win races in the future. I
I'm
think
I'm
that's got to be the mindset for a Formula One team. You've got to always look to be progressing. Whereas to me, Alfa Romeo doesn't look like it's going to improve. It just looks like they just want to stay the same, bide their time, ride the wave, and get out of the sport as quickly as they got into it.
It's a sad thing because like you can see that there is potential there. Like the
100%.
qualifying pace has been great.
So
Sometimes
true.
even the race pace has been in races where they make a mistake, their race pace is still really competitive. They just lose too much ground. I
I
mean,
think Zhou Yu's been really good too. Like, I think he's a very underrated. I guess I still call him a rookie, but like to have a teammate like Valtteri Bottas who's come from a race winning outfit to, obviously this car and to be pretty comparable to him is a true testament to his talent. I think Zhou's quite talented. It would be sad if he left the sport, which I can see happening. But
you
then
know what
again,
though,
who
Joe?
who would you put in that car?
I think there's plenty of drivers who can move into that car. Really, like if
Yeah,
that's not a car that you're going
yeah.
to compete for a
It's a
win.
car you're going to learn.
I just feel like Joe. I've been saying he needs a race where he sort of puts his stand down and says,
True.
I'm coming kind of moment.
Mm,
And the where he qualified this race gave him, I think, the best
best opportunity
chance
for
he's
that.
ever had
Yeah.
at a track that is very hard to overtake. So
Mm,
with some decent strategy, he might have fallen from fifth,
mm,
but he could have maybe maintained a point and had a decent race. And instead, he stalls on the start. Understandable. There might have been a car problem. They were saying, fair enough. These
mm.
things happen, but to then keep that snowball
Just
rolling
keep
by
going
wiping out.
backwards throughout the race. Yeah.
It's just like, guys, I know that what you're doing is immensely hard. I understand that, but
Mm,
you're putting yourself in the spot. Like we're not asking you to be in the top 20 races in the world. You are putting yourself there.
mm.
So you have to then be put under the scrutiny that we give everyone else.
Very true.
And I
What's
just feel like he missed the opportunity.
the next one? Is that Spa?
So I think Spa is next,
Okay.
and it's going to be interesting. I feel like the cool points are Red Bull's going to win if everything goes to plan.
Yeah, Red Bull
Let's go
will win. The only question is how much.
by how much. That's fair enough. I'm interested to see if we get weather, because we usually
Yeah.
get weather from there. That can spice it up. I want to see if McLaren can keep this going. That will be fantastic. I want to see if Mercedes can respond. Like there's so
Mm,
many cool little points, and that between Mercedes and now McLaren, so Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston, McLaren, that little battle,
mm.
I think is fascinating enough to keep the season, for me, interesting,
So true.
regardless of what happens with Max.
What's
Max has
your
won.
what's your top five prediction? Because I know the top three is too easy. You're just going to put two Red Bulls in there. So what's the
for
top
next
five
for,
prediction?
for next race.
Yeah, for the Grand Prix.
I think it's going to be Max, Oscar,
Okay. Oh, I like that.
Max, Oscar, George, or Perez, and then Lando and Hamilton.
That's pretty good. Well, I'm going to make a bold prediction as well. I'm going to go Max.
You're breaking That's a brave pick, that is.
Yeah, I went with the underdog for the next
Under,
race. Yeah, the
underdog. Yeah.
$1.01 favorite. Yeah, it's unlike me. No, look, I'm gonna go Max. I'm gonna go. I'm hoping Checo gets his act together. So I'm gonna go Checo. I'm gonna go Hamilton. Let's go Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. I think Oscar's gonna get one up on him. Yeah, because I don't think he's beaten him this year. Not
Oscar. I don't think so. He might.
no.
He might have in a race that
Yeah, maybe. I think
the
he finished like
McLaren.
eighth or something, and Norris finished ninth or 10th. But
I'm sure Lawrence has
I
had
reckon
engine.
the biggest mover for me, obviously Lando Norris getting on the podium, but the biggest mover for me since the start of the season has been Oscar. And for him to adapt so quickly to, Lando Norris, who so many people link him to, the same sort of talent as George Russell and Max Verstappen, for a kid in his first year after having, not to mention, a year out of the
Oh,
sport, literally sitting on the couch watching these guys race, for him to be within a couple of tenths, like he's only like a tenth off Lando in just about every session. For him to be that close to him is so impressive.
and this is also the great reminder of the sport. Before his upgrade, he looked ordinary.
Average, yeah, he did
He
too.
looked average.
He's so
Logan
so
Sargent
true.
before their upgrade also looked very average. And
Do you
the
think he's
upgrade,
improved?
Logan,
Yeah.
I think he's improved massively. Like
Okay.
the fact that even this week before his engine failure, he was in front of
Albon.
not Albon. Albon was ahead of him, but he was in front of some of the passes, AlphaTauris on
Mm,
pace, and he was
mm.
actually pushing to take over Hulkenberg before his accident.
I didn't really see like probably the Formula One potential for Sargent when he came into it.
He's up
Um,
against it because I don't think he was ready for it. Like
yeah,
I
but
think I
I
think he's
definitely
undercooked.
think that maybe he's raised an eyebrow on some of his performances, been relatively close to Albon, an ex Red Bull driver. Um, I think, well, I'm hoping that guys like he and, Joe Guan Yu can figure it out, because I do think now that I'm obviously thinking about them that they deserve to be on the grid, but for me, I see a lot more, what's the word? A lot more work to do for guys like Sargent. I think he's got a
Yeah,
lot more to
he's
do to impress the F1 paddock that he deserves to be there. If we see Nick DeVries get moved on halfway through the season, what's to say, he's not next on a chopping block. So
that is true, but he's in a much more forgiving team.
yeah,
Like, and that is also an important point. I think that a lot of drivers fail to probably correctly think about when they sign with teams.
mm.
Like, what is the expectation that you need to fulfill for that team? Like
Well,
Sargent's expectation this year, his
is to
only
finish
expectation
races.
is just to learn.
Yeah.
And as long as as long as the upgrades that the team is getting and his performances sort of correlate with the steps that Albon makes, I think like if Albon finishes, I think he finished 8th 2 races ago, Sargent finished 11th. I think
Mm.
Albon finished 9th, Sargent finished 11th.
Mm.
That's not him finishing 17th and 18th
True.
like he was before that. So as long as
Like we
he's making
saw, who was George Russell's teammate?
Latifi. So when Latifi
Latifi.
never
He never
progressed.
even got close to the top 10, whereas, George Russell
No,
was Mr. Saturday. So
that's right. So as long as I think Sargent keeps progressing at sort of like a comparable like graph to Albon, I think he'll be fine because I've seen
mm,
more from him in the last 4
yeah,
races
that's a good point. And
than I saw from Latifi in
yeah,
4
I
years.
think maybe I need to personally watch him a little bit closer,